There you go. Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you to the Engineers Ireland and the Institute for inviting me tonight to speak. So what I'm going to talk about is my own personal experience of my journey becoming a renewable energy installer and what I've learned on the way in the last 15 years. And as Keith was saying, we're living in a very frightening time. Humanity is at a crossroads. We now know this decade is the last decade that we can put policies in place and implement them to stop runaway man-made climate change. We are in an ecological and climate emergency. And in 2020, we got a taste what it was like to live in a health emergency. And what is coming is going to be 2020, a health emergency, but every year, unless we do urgent action now to actually stop that. So I'm just going to share my screen and just make sure that's working. Is that working, Keith? Just give me a nod. Yeah, okay. So engineers, vital for the survival of the planet. And I really mean this when I say this, is the world needs engineers more than ever. Oh, sorry, it's my, yeah. So anthropogenic climate change is actually changing the atmospheric greenhouse gases, which is causing our planet to warm into such an extent, unless we take action, we're going to see collapse of civilization as we know it. And, you know, not making this up, this is all backed by science. We've just witnessed in 2020 world records never seen before. We've had temperatures in Siberia of 38 degrees inside the Arctic Circle. We've had the Arctic Circle and Siberia, the peatlands on fire. We've had record fires in California. We've had droughts in different parts of the world, typhoons, hurricanes. Here in the UK, we've had record flooding, record heat waves. We've had the hottest, driest records in temperature in parts of the world. That's actually caused food shortages. We've actually had food shortages caused by excess rain in the UK of wheat harvest destroyed in October. What we've also got is we've got these tipping points that are getting banded around the place. And what it is if we reach any of these tipping points, we're going to have accelerated climate change. And we've got quite a few different tipping points here on the screen, from the Amazon rainforests to the coral reefs to permafrosts. But I'm just going to focus on one of them, just to give you an idea of the cascading runaway effects of climate change, is the Blue Ocean event. Its Blue Ocean event is a ice-free Arctic. So in 2020, we had NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, produce a report. It's got about 7,000 scientists working for it. It's based in the US, funded by the US government. And their report brought forward the melting of the Arctic sea ice from 2050, 2060 to 2034 or earlier. So the models are predicting most likely to see by 2034 that the Arctic sea ice during the summer will be gone. And what happens is the Arctic sea ice reflects a vast amount of solar energy into the space every year. Now, if we have a blue ocean event, it's going to be dark and it's actually going to start absorbing solar irradiance and actually increasing the temperature of the seawater. The knock-on effect is the Arctic is already 4 degrees warmer than the rest of the world. It's going to affect the jet stream. We've already seen just recently the record temperatures in Texas with the polar vortex moving down from the Arctic over North America. So we're going to see more of that, and we're going to see ridges and troughs. And that means we could have the likes of Ireland, the UK, British Isles could be locked into one summer of excessive rain, and then the next summer excessive drought. Okay, so the whole of the Arctic actual moving down towards Greenland. It's going to rapidly accelerate sea level rising, and this is going to have a knock-on effect with the production of food. And this is just one of the tipping points. So what's causing climate change? Well, we hear a lot about greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases are predominantly from fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, and peat. We also have some greenhouse gases that are man-made greenhouse gases, the CFCs, chloroform, and we've also got CH4, which is methane. So we've also got greenhouse gases coming from the use of agriculture and more recently the actual destruction of forests and soils is releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So every year we burn billions and billions of tons of coal, oil, gas, and also produce vast amounts of cement, which produces greenhouse gases. So the common term that we use is, we call it CO2, which is carbon dioxide. But the actual term for greenhouse gases is referred to as CO2e, so carbon dioxide equivalent. So just for the simplicity of this talk, we'll talk in terms of carbon. So we've got the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. They produce these reports that monitor greenhouse gases, and they monitor the state of the climate. And this year we're having a COP26, which is the global UN negotiations on climate change, where all the countries of the world come together and they discuss about setting targets for limiting greenhouse gases. And the most up-to-date scientific evidence that we have produced by the IPCC is that we need to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Otherwise, we're going to have more droughts, famines, wars. The list goes on. So I'm not going to go doing too much on what the outcome is going to be. But needless to say, it's what we need to aim for. And this year, this decade, is the last decade that we can actually put our targets in place, because once we emit CO2 into the atmosphere, it will actually stay up there for a very long time and actually keep on the actual effect of global warming. As the IPCC said, that we need to actually rapidly transition the energy, the land, urban and infrastructure, including transport and buildings and the industrial systems that we have, and we need to do that now. Unfortunately, the world is not on track to meet any of its targets. So we've set these targets in gigaterms of CO2. We are emitting about 52 gigatons a year of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases. By the end of 2030, we need to halve this emissions. And this moment in time, we're actually increasing our CO2 emissions. So we're actually going in the wrong direction. So the world is not on track to meet any of its targets. So we need to rapidly transition to renewable energy, or sustainable energy. And at this moment in time, of all the energy consumed in the world, 85% of that is from fossil fuels, and only 15% is from renewables and nuclear. And it was the latest figures in 2019. So it just shows you the pathway that we need to go to. We need to get this figure from 15% renewable and nuclear to 100%, and we need to do that rapidly. Good news is that we've got vast amount of renewable potential energy that's given to us every single day by the sun. So the main types of renewable energy is solar energy. We've also got gravitational energy that comes from the moon, from the tides. And we've got geothermal, or deep geothermal, the actual heat of the earth. So the sun itself gives us enough energy to power the world in 1 hour. So if we could just harvest that energy in 1 hour, we could power the whole world for a year. Collectively, the renewable energy sources can power the world over 3,000 times if we can just harness it. Solar alone is nearly 3,000. Wind, if we could harness wind energy, is 200 times the amount of energy that we need. So each form of energy generator that we have emits carbon dioxide. So I'm going to give you an example here. We've got the amount of energy that's produced to produce 1 gigawatt of electricity. Give you an example here on this slide here is, let's say pick coal, is 888 tons is required to produce 1 gigawatt hour. So that's 888 tons of CO2 is used or is produced in 1 gigawatt. Compare that to a wind turbine, and you can see wind, it's 26 tons. So what we need to do is we need to rapidly switch and stop burning coal, oil, gas, any hydrocarbons, and switch to renewable forms, hydro, wind, biomass, nuclear, solar PV. So on learning about all this, it was, I believe, 2005. Yeah, 2005 was part of Friends of the Earth, and they had this campaign, and it was called the Big Ask Campaign, and it was leading to the Climate Change Act, and they were going around all the politicians, and they're highlighting the fact of the ecological climate emergency. And by then, the world had already been reporting. We had like quite a few different COP meetings, and then the UK government, I think it was Gordon Brown was leading on it, took this very seriously, and the Climate Change Bill became the Climate Change Act in 2008. And I was very inspired by this, and I gave up my job as a surveyor, and I went and I started working in renewable energy. And I quickly discovered that the people I was working with, nobody had much of an idea of how to install heat pumps. So I went back and completed a master's in renewable energy, set up a company installing solar, photovoltaic, and also heat pumps. This here is an example of one of the houses that we did in Cambridge. It's a zero carbon house consisting of 10 kilowatts of solar photovoltaic and a 28 kilowatt air source heat pump. So this building will never actually need energy. So the amount of energy it consumes, it actually produces itself. And that's for all the lighting, heating, swimming pool. It's also got a green roof for keeping in as much energy as possible. So things are going pretty well. We started doing churches, houses, schools. We even went and set up a charity. We set up a charity called Renewables for Schools, where we were going and teaching children about sustainability, climate change, renewable energy. And we worked with the Department of Energy, and also we went to the Department of Education, and we wrote the part of the pupils' solar school strategy. So everything was moving in a really nice direction. You could feel the momentum. There was more people working in sustainability, more people working in renewable energy. We even went and got our company past 2030, which is a certificate to do energy efficiency schemes. So we're looking at doing the renewable energy systems, and we're looking at then expanding into external and internal house insulation. So we're bringing all these different packages together. You know, this is the way forward. This is what needs to be done. In the UK, we've got 21 million properties that need to be retrofitted in the next 20 years. It's about 25,000 properties a week. Phenomenal amount of work. Then disaster strikes. Change of government in 2015. There was a coalition government, and then the Tories got power. And one of the policies that they decided to look into was all the green policies. And they systematically went and scrapped onshore wind. It meant if you were wanted to install a wind turbine, you could not get planning permission for onshore wind anymore. They got rid of the feed-in tariffs for solar, so destroying the solar industry. There was a green home scheme for energy efficiency, which they scrapped. They moved the target for zero carbon homes, which was supposed to be 2016, 2018. They got rid of that. They sold off the Green Investment Bank, and several other, it was the period of time was completely, it was just absolutely heartbreaking. And I saw people I'd studied with, and I'd done my master's, some brilliant minds who no longer had jobs, people working in wind. One colleague's now gone to California to work. Another colleague was working on wind and wave technology in the Scottish Islands. They had their R&D grant funds pulled. He's now working in Sweden. So there was this big brain drain that happened. The government decided to support hydraulical fracking instead, and also expensive nuclear and offshore wind. I went back to Friends of the Earth, and we had a campaign to save our solar. It was 27,000 jobs were under threat nationwide, over £110 million overspent. I ended up in the Houses of Commons and at one of these closed door meetings, and all the MPs said it was all got to do with value for money. I couldn't believe it. I had to close my company, and I'm now still to this day doing projects overseas. We're working in Brazil. I haven't worked in the UK since. It motivated me to become political. I was so disgusted about what happened with the policies that I joined the Green Party, and I was using my angry voice that I ended up getting selected to run for local government, and then I ended up getting selected to run as MP, as a parliamentary candidate for Putney in the 2019 general election, which is great. It gave me a platform to talk about green policies, which they've got fantastic policies in place for decarbonising and actually dealing with the ecological climate emergency. And now I think are actually the third largest party in the country. But even that is not good enough, because politics, they move in 5-year cycle, and we've only got 10 years to sort out the climate emergency. And with each change of government, the government can come in and actually change the policies that the last government did. So the policies that are moving into the wrong direction since signing the Paris Accord in 2015, over 2.1 trillion pounds, it's actually $2.4 trillion, has been spent in new oil and gas exploration. And it'll take 20 to 40 years before they can realize the capital invested in this. Okay, otherwise it will become a stranded asset. So we've got huge amounts of money being invested in oil and gas. We've got phenomenal amounts of money going into fossil fuel subsidies. There's more fossil fuel subsidies than subsidies given to renewables. We're seeing transport expansion, airport expansion, massive deforestation. We're seeing increase in intensive farming. So we're really missing and lacking very strong government leadership in all of this. So I ended up becoming also a climate change activist, calling it the governments. I was with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, and a new group started called Extinction Rebellion, and I joined them, and I ended up working on their media team, because one of my biggest problems I've had is the lack of people talking about the climate emergency, and the fact that we have the likes of news agencies, BBC, RTE, and they do not report on the climate science. They're not reporting about reports from the UN Secretary General when he's talking about existential threat to humanity. We're not hearing this information, and because people are not hearing this information, we're not getting the policies that are following. And people say it seems a bit of an extremist, but Extinction Rebellion have managed to get the UK government to declare a climate emergency. Irish government followed quickly behind. We've seen amazing results in terms of there's now more people talking about the climate emergency, and it's definitely gone up the scale of people's concerns, rightfully so. Here's an action outside the ITV. It's about media tell the truth. Most amazing thing about this is I've had now senior people from the BBC contact me and talk to me privately and actually thank us for the actions that we're doing, because it makes their job easier. So where the mainstream media are failing to talk about the extent of the climate emergency, we're filling in that gap. So policies. Denmark is a fantastic example of when policies work extremely well. So they have a long-term strategy in place. They have all the political parties are behind them. So they're unified in their approach. This picture here, you can just see in the background, you can see a couple of wind turbines. And these wind turbines are actually 20% of them are owned locally by the people actually in Copenhagen. So when they do a renewable energy project, every single project that they do, they have buy-in from the local community. And 20% of the projects is given to them at cost, and they get the benefits out of it. They can reuse that money for local libraries, or they can invest themselves. Also, this is a district heating system you can see here in the city, and it's a combined heat and power unit where all the excess heat is actually used for heating the buildings in Copenhagen. They also have policies in place for actually to be fully decarbonised by 2050, and that's including transportation. They've got like 180% tax on cars to dissuade people from using cars, and they've also got fantastic infrastructure for cycling and public transport. So, and now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the future and where we need to be heading. We've got a lot of people are talking about electric vehicles, electric planes, hydrogen cars, which is all absolutely fantastic. So in order to decarbonize, we've got to decarbonize transportation systems, our heating of buildings, our energy systems. But also when we're going from like for like, it's actually going to end up giving us a lot of problems. So we have designs in place for hydrogen trucks, hydrogen cars, hydrogen ambulances, hydrogen and electric airplanes, and it all sounds fantastic. But the realism, if we want to go and we want to swap all our ICE cars, our internal combustion engine cars, and vehicles on the planet, I think it's like 1.4 billion vehicles in the world for electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. One is going to use a vast amount of energy and resources that we actually don't have to actually use on this, and also it's putting strain on the motorways. We're going to have to build more roads. It's not actually going to solve any problems. So we're in a very good position now to actually rethink what our long-term strategy is of where we should be heading as a society. you know, we should be looking at sustainable travel alternatives, you know, in different countries, and even large parts of Europe and Ireland and UK. We're putting in more cycleways, but we need to make them that they're more attractive to use than cars. We've got samples in different countries where you can actually you can cycle to the local train station, you can bring your bike, you can travel 30 miles to where you want to go to work, and then the other side, then you continue cycling. We've seen the rise of the use of electric vehicles. So we need to get people out of the cars. We need to stop the concept of private car ownership. To produce an electric vehicle or hydrogen car uses a vast amount of energy. And even some of the new EVs that we're seeing, they're like SUV cars. So they're very heavy cars, and they use a lot of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases and rare earth metals to actually produce them. Retrofitting existing building stock of houses. This is vitally important. This needs to be done as a priority. UK has one of the oldest housing stocks in Europe. I know from experience in Ireland that a lot of the houses over there are poorly insulated. This is a very quick win, and government need to have long-term policies that people who are retrofitting properties know that they're able to receive the funds and the support that's actually needed to retrofit the properties. Decarbonising heat. In the UK, it's the biggest form of user of greenhouse gas is heat. We've got a lot of different options in place. We've got combined heat and power units, CHP. We've got district heating systems like they have in Copenhagen. We can start using them and using excess energy from our electrical plants. Heat pumps are going to be vitally important, and they run off electrical energy. And in order to do that, we're going to have to increase the capacity of our grids. Then we've got hydrogen fuels. So excess amount of energy from wind turbines and excess amount of energy from solar power plants can be used to produce green hydrogen fuel, which we can store, and then when it's needed later, we can actually release that energy for electrical energy or for heating houses. And we've also got biomass, which depending on the type of biomass can be good. And if it's the wrong type of biomass, if it's too wet and you haven't got the proper type of fuel in place and scrubbers, it can actually contribute to excess air particles, and they're banned in a lot of places. Something else to consider and think about, we don't hear very much about, is steel and concrete. So steel uses a vast amount of energy to produce, to mine, to produce, to smelter. It's estimated about 5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions is from the production of steel. We've got now the very first large-scale green electrical arc furnace plant that's been, it's going to be using green hydrogen as a source, is being built in northern Sweden, and it will be operation in 2024. So we've got a coal plant that's going ahead in Cumbria in the UK, and the argument for opening a new coal mine is to produce choking coal for steel. But we can actually see examples of where we can actually use green hydrogen instead as a power source for the furnaces. Wind is quite amazing. As we saw from the second or third slide, we've got 20 times more wind resources in the world to power all the needs of humanity. And it's just quite phenomenal what's happened in the last 10 years in terms of design of wind turbines. UK, the offshore wind in the UK has just completely taken off. And here is one of the latest wind turbines. It's a Haliade X. It's a 12 megawatt turbine. It's higher. It's higher than the London Eye, so it's between the height of the Empire State Building and the London Eye. It's 220 meters across the span. It produces enough energy for 16,000 homes. And amazingly, when I was just checking this out today, just to see how it was getting along, the wind turbine is now being tested in Rotterdam, and is also being tested in the UK. And I discovered that the Vista wind turbine manufacturers are actually coming out with a 15 megawatt. So they're getting bigger, more efficient. And Vista also have a new wind turbine coming out that's constructed of timber. So it's like it's a laminate timber where they actually don't need to use as much steel for the construction. And here's an island that they're talking about building in Dogger Banks in the North Sea. It's going to be the North Sea wind power hub. So we'll have an airstrip. There'll be houses for the workers and also a harbour. So it means for efficiency and also for the interconnectors to make this into like a super hub for wind. So it's quite phenomenal what's happening in the wind industry. And my industry, solar, is extremely versatile. It took off in the 1950s really by NASA using it for the space program. But also we've got nearly 1 billion people in the world who've got no access to grid electricity. And solar now is providing microgrids. So you can put solar anywhere. The price of solar is tumbling. The install prices is coming down. In the last 30 years, the price of a solar cell is 99.99% cheaper. And it takes a while to get your head around that figure. But the first solar panels were costing millions, and now it's the cheapest form of energy in the world. It's also, the main ingredient is Si, which is sand, which is the second most abundant substance in the world. It's extremely versatile. We're seeing now solar-powered cars. They can be used. You can use solar energy in different ways for concentrated CHP. And also now we've got is agri photovoltaics, which is combining producing energy and farming, where you can certain types of plants that actually like shade, and by putting solar panels over them, you get 2 uses out of the land. So moving into the future, we now have deep geothermal is starting to be used a lot more. It's digging 4 or 5 kilometers into the ground and pumping glycol solution down to heat turbines for generating electricity. So certain areas in the world, it works really well. We've also got tidal energy. We've got floating solar panels that you can put over hydro plants. And the future, well, to tie in all the renewable energy, what we've got is, so wind and solar is intermittent. So the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. And it's the most common argument against renewable energy is the intermittency. But if you have interconnectors going from here to Denmark, which we do, often we got them going from Ireland to the UK to Denmark, we're hooking up the North Sea, and soon we'll have large DC cables going the whole way down to Spain and Portugal. And by doing that, you stop the intermittency, because somewhere the sun is going to be shining, the wind is going to be blowing. And you combine that with smart grid technology to monitor how much energy is going onto the grid, and also for charging electric vehicles. So when there's an excess amount of wind, you can use that to produce hydrogen, and you can use it to power electric vehicles or desalination plants. And then when there's less wind and less solar, then you can go and switch off heavy industries and switch off appliances. So we need to be moving from the traditional type of grid we have into a flexible, smart grid. And also, in order to do this, we need to greatly increase the amount of capacity we have on grids, which is going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs here in the UK and around the world. And we're going to need engineers to actually match all that. Where we're heading, last ditch effort for humanity, Geo-Engineering. Unfortunately, a lot of governments now are looking at carbon capture and storage as a viable option to sequence carbon from the atmosphere. There's a couple of trial plants in operation. It does work, but it's expensive, and it's a question of scalability, of whether we can scale it in time. We have natural ways of sequencing carbon. We've got trees, forest, kelps, mangroves, and soil as well. Or we can just stop emitting vast amount of carbon into the atmosphere in the first place. So back to the greatest engineering challenge faced to humanity is tackling the climate emergency. And Earth is a closed biosphere. So nothing gets in or out. The only thing that gets into our biosphere is solar radiance and about 20 tons of space dust a year. Everything else is in Earth, and that's the only resources we can use. In the Apollo space mission in Apollo 13, they were due to land on the moon, and they had an accident, and one of the oxygen tanks in the spaceship exploded or leaked. It took them a while to figure out what was going on, so they had to abort the mission. And what followed the next couple of days was one of the greatest modern engineering feats. The astronauts, trained engineers, and people back in Houston were able to go through everything that was on board the spaceship and then figure out what was needed to survive and get them back safely. And that was switching off the heating where they were sleeping in sub-zero temperatures, to minimizing the amount of exertion that they were doing so they didn't breathe as much oxygen, right down to the rationing of food. And they did it, and we've now seen blockbusters, movies made about it. So the question is, you know, who's going to rise up to the challenge and have movies made about engineers in the future? So coming to the end of just the presentation, and it really is, what can the Institute of Civil Engineers and Engineers Ireland do? Well, it's great that you've declared a climate emergency, but now is the time to actually act on it. We need to demand long-term sustainable policies from our governments that we can work to. The codes of practice that we have need to be updated yearly and in line with the latest science. Also, we've got an obligation to educate and inform our clients and the people that you're dealing with. This can be choosing the materials that go into construction, right down to, you know, it's a lot of information you can give clients. If you're in the UK, we've got the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, which is updating the Climate Change Act from 2008. It'd be very good if the Institute of Civil Engineers and Engineers Ireland had a look at that and supported that. But what's really important is to start training engineers and technicians for the roles that are needed now and in the future to transform our planet into a livable planet, and with the tools that we have. And also, not to be negative, but you know, just keep abreast of the latest science and actually prepare for worst case scenarios, because we will need engineers to deal with it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Fergal. Very thought-provoking and interesting presentation, and certainly there can be no question in anybody's mind that there is a real crisis that needs to be addressed, and that the solutions to that crisis are essentially technical solutions. The cultural changes that will be needed to reduce the overall consumption of carbon dioxide, or production of carbon dioxide, and consumption of the world's resources are a more sociological and political issue, I suppose. But in terms of actually addressing the physical problems that exist out there, there's just too much to do to wait for that cultural change to take place. There has to be a massive technical swing from the way that things are done to the way that things need to be done. I think that you know, there's been a lot of focus on this from the ICE president, Rachel Skinner. From the start of her presidency last year, she has been preaching to civil engineers in particular, but engineers of all descriptions, that we have it in our power to implement solutions that will address the issues. But more importantly, we have got to influence others to realize the need for change. So automotive engineers can come up with smaller cars. I agree with you entirely, Fergal. One of my pet hates is these enormous 4x4s going around the place, currently using up all the fossil fuel resources. But, you know, as you say, they're just focusing mostly on like for like at this stage. So the automotive engineers can only do so much in terms of the technology, but they need the consumer to get on board with the fact that they don't need these enormous cars, or indeed any cars. So I think I'm just looking at the Q&As. We haven't actually got any written questions as yet. If anybody has any questions that you'd like to put to Fergal, please feel free to put them in the Q&A panel. I see that one of our participants, Ronan Swan, has raised his hand, so I might allow Ronan to speak. Ronan, if you just introduce yourself, tell us your affiliation, and fire ahead. You need to unmute yourself, I think, Ronan, to be able to, for us to hear you. Hello? No, afraid I'm not hearing you. No, that's strange, because I can see that you are unmuted, but it doesn't seem that we can actually hear you.
He looks, he's still muted.
Yeah, he did unmute though for a few moments, and no, there we are now. Try again. No, sorry about that, Ronan. Perhaps you can type your question in the Q&A box, and if that's practical.
So yeah, so just on that, you're talking about EVs, electric vehicles. So in order to, you know, to get like EVs, realistically, we're going to have to change the battery technologies. So there's new battery technologies that are coming that could replace like lithium ion. So we've got a resource issue going on about how much lithium ion is available in the world and rare earth metals. So we need to have a priority in place of who gets what and for what reasons.
Yeah.
So there's rare earth metals used in wind turbines for the magnets, which are vital. And also, lithium ion is a finite resource. So as I was saying, if we switch the 1 billion or 1.4 billion ICE vehicles to electric vehicles, we just simply don't have the resources to do that. There's other ways we can look at the hydrogen cars, hydrogen fuel cell cars as well. That's another way of doing things. But all these use vast amount of energy and vast amount of metal and rare earth metals to put them in place. And in Norway, where we've seen the biggest uptake of electrical vehicles in the world, what we've discovered now is people have actually kept their old cars and are using public transport less. So like doesn't actually work.
Yeah, so we're not actually achieving the ultimate.
Not achieving the. Start with the end goal in place and then work backwards.
Yeah.
Every decision you make is like, am I contributing extra CO2 into the atmosphere, or am I doing something to actually stop it?
Exactly, and I think that's the other point of view, from the point of view of engineers. The potential to save the planet is that a lot of engineers are working in design environments where you're perhaps starting with the concept of a project, and then you're working into options for delivery of the project, and then finally into design, detailing, and construction. And I think that's where the individual engineer can have a significant impact by really questioning, first of all, the need for a particular project, then the scale of it, how it's implemented, levels of redundancy, for example. I have experienced customers on occasion who want redundancy in everything. And that in many cases is driven more by the fact that they have the money to do it than the fact that they actually need it. So I think, again, responsible engineers can influence decisions like that by saying, we know you can afford it and we know you'd like it, but actually you don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I can see questions here. Just questions are coming in.
Oh, jolly good. Yes.
Yeah. So shall I just
yeah, you fire ahead and at your leisure. Yeah.
Okay, we've got one from Don. What is the problem with governments not supporting retrofitting houses? Retrofitting houses, right? Energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit. This is what paramount we should be. This is the one we should be focusing our efforts on right now. And if you think about it, the amount of energy that you put into heating a house, and for it just to literally go through your walls and your roof, we need to have a long-term strategy in place where the homeowner is not too much financially affected by the actual scheme. So we've got examples in Germany. They have pay as you save. There's methods in place where you can actually pay by the amount of energy that you save. It works really well. But I think what we really need to have is a rollout street by street, and where the installation it's guaranteed, reputable suppliers, the cost is low, and by doing this we'll actually create like tens of thousands of jobs when actually we've got recovery going on from COVID, and we need to have a recovery in place. And the shambles what the UK government put in place for the energy efficiency just now, the uptake was only, I think it was only 17% uptake on the funding that was put in place. And that's shortism. You need to have long-term policies, and that's the only way that we can actually retrofit properties. Can you see the questions? Shall I keep on?
Yes, you just fire ahead. Yeah.
one. So Ronan, hi, thanks. Really interesting presentation. What are the 3 actions we should be taking today? So I think the very first action we really need to be taking is using our voice, and we've got the technical solutions of actually to do what we need to achieve. And even Bill Gates has come out with this this vision, a way of doing things, of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and bioengineering. We don't. We actually have the technical solutions right now. We need to implement them, and to do that, we need to get the government and the local government behind the schemes, and we need to get the financing in place. So I never thought I'd end up being political, but I ended up having to do what I was doing on the streets because the policies weren't in place. So the number one thing is policies in place. Also, like if you're a structural engineer, civil engineer, is the building materials that you use. An example there was the the green steel. So you should be questioning your suppliers of all the materials you use should be sustainable, and also can you, instead of using concrete, can you use a different type of concrete? There's hemp concrete, there's wooden alternatives, and also even questioning, the schemes. Do we need to put this scheme in place? Can we design it a different way? Yeah, there's quite a lot to say on that one. Got another question here from Paul Kavanagh. Thanks, Fergal. Is nuclear power fusion reactors a viable environmental option during the transition period from fossil fuels burning to renewables? Apologies, I was late joining your presentation. So this is a very interesting question, because there's a huge debate about nuclear and renewables, and people think that they're competing, and in a way they are competing. And it's really competing for the limited amount of funds in place. So nuclear power, it produces vast amount of energy. The equivalent that if you wanted to get from renewables will take up a vast amount of space. So you got these pluses and minuses. You got the different types of reactors. You got 3rd generation, 4th generation. We've got small thermal nuclear reactors. They're talking about putting them into towns and cities. We've also got fusion and fission, so the two different types. So if we can crack fusion reactors and they work, absolutely fantastic. But the problem that we've got is time. We just do not have the time and place to build these huge power plants, and it can take anything from 11 to 17 years to build a nuclear power plant with the planning. Also, the cost. The Hickley Point C was built, and the strike price for electricity is £92.50 per megawatt hour. And if people don't know what that means, it means how much, as a consumer, we're guaranteed to pay for that amount of energy. In comparison, you can build floating wind turbines, giant floating wind turbines, for half that price, at about 50 to 60 pounds per megawatt hour. You can put in offshore wind turbines for about 40, and even onshore wind turbines are about 25 pounds per megawatt hour. So one is the cost, is a cost implication. The other one is the time it actually takes to build it. So personally, I think what we need to do is absolutely continue researching nuclear power, but do not depend on it, okay? And do not make a decision like the UK government deciding to go down nuclear and at the detriment of other renewables. We can put solar thermal onto buildings. We can, some of the things we can do way quicker than nuclear.
One other question, Fergal, in the chat box. How would Fergal recommend moving our careers towards working in renewable energy, as he has, for those of us involved in other engineering disciplines with no experience?
It's not no experience. It's absolutely all transferable skills. You think about it. To put in onshore wind, you need civil works. You need a road engineer to build it. It's mechanical engineering. It's electrical engineering, aeronautical engineering. You know, it's a lot of the things, like even the technician side, it's all transferable skills, you know, and it's looking what you can do. And we've had guys straight out of college working with us who are civil engineers, and within 2 weeks they're designing PV systems. You know, it's if you can use a calculator and you've done a 4 or 5 year degree, you'll find a lot of these programs very, very simple to use.
So in other words, one shouldn't be afraid of applying for jobs in the renewable energy industry, just because you haven't worked there before.
No, absolutely. But it's not just even renewable energy. It's just, we're talking about like upgrading the grids. We're talking about the decarbonizing transportation. There's the agricultural sector. There's also like chemical engineering. You know, if you actually look at the amount of different jobs out there, we are going to be crying out for engineers to decarbonize the world and for this transition that's needed. You know, so it's all very much transferable skills. Yeah.
Well, as a matter of interest, actually, in the ICE Brunel lecture, which is being delivered around the world at the moment, Seth Schultz speaks about the need for additional engineers, and some study that has been done quite recently has estimated that there's a shortfall of something like 10 million engineers in Africa alone, and the rest of the world. So there really is there's a crisis of skill shortage there as well. That's I suppose another thing that engineers can do is to just promote the profession of engineering against a backdrop of the climate crisis, because I think a lot of young people who might not have thought of engineering as a career may well be swayed to consider an engineering career if they knew that they could actually have a real impact on the environmental crisis. Just one more question has come in on the Q&A, and I think we might make this the last one, as it's just after 7:30. When it comes to large public transport construction projects, what are the big ticket items that delivery agencies should be going after without negatively impacting the business case for such projects?
That's an interesting question. Very wide open there. You know, you've got from road building. You can use different types of like road surfaces that's recycled, made out of now plastics are getting reused. So the first is actually look at what materials you can use. You've also got how you're designing the system. So it really comes of what level you're actually coming into this. So I know, talking to civil engineers, you know, who use vast amount of concrete and steel, and that yet concrete and steel, you know, is one of the main contributors of CO2 emissions. So it's really trying to, you know, seeing what materials you can recycle and upcycle, or, you know, use something else that's more sustainable in the first place. And I suppose the biggest question comes down to the design in the first place of like, is it actually needed, or is there an alternative way of doing it that's actually more sustainable?
Yeah, well, a thought that just occurs to me on that actually is that guided busways, which have become quite a popular thing in certain parts of the world, are quite a good case in point, because they do require substantial concrete structures typically to maintain the guiding of the buses. So, you know, by perhaps abandon the idea of a guided busway and just make sure that you've got dedicated bus routes, will probably be a lower carbon option.
It's gonna we're gonna have a lot of conversations like this. You know, there's at the moment in the UK there's the HS2, the high speed rail, and you know, from the own admission, it won't be carbon neutral for 120 years. But then it comes down to how much is actually used and how much people switch from local air travel to using trains.
Yeah.
But you know, but that in itself, you know, it's you're designing something to travel at 300 kilometers an hour. You know, if you designed it to travel at 200 kilometers an hour and you had broadband, you know, where it didn't have to go in direct routes, is it a better better use of resources.
Exactly. I think that's probably the biggest thing, is really analyzing projects properly with a future view rather than looking at the current demand. Okay, well, look, I think we'll perhaps call it a day at that. So once more, Fergal, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. I know that you have a busy other life, so we really do appreciate it.